Welcome back to another one of your flip lectures. Today we're going to talk about the beginning of the First World War. Now, we talked about all of the causes for the war, but in terms of preparing for this conflict, the preparations for war actually began way before the war even started. We talked about this idea that kind of these European countries are pushing for war, and so a lot of them actually already had a plan in place. Now, Germany and France had fought a couple of wars in the past over their shared border, and Germany, years before the war breaks out, came up with a plan to attack France called the Schlieffen Plan. And this plan called for a quick invasion and conquering of France, and then turning to the east to worry about Russia. And the belief is that the war on the Eastern Front would be slow to start, because that Russia didn't really have industry railroads. It would take them a long time to get ready. And so that's the assumption that Germany is going to move forward on. France also had their own battle plan, known as Plan 17. And so most of these countries, before war even comes, they have an idea of what they want to do. And so in August of 1914, Germany invaded Belgium, which had declared neutrality, and then once they went through Belgium, went to basically try to conquer France. Now at this point, Great Britain gets involved in the war. They had pledged to support Belgium, and once Belgium was invaded, Great Britain came into the war. And I want you to notice kind of the green fields, because those are soon going to be gone. And so Germany very quickly advanced to within about 30 miles of Paris, which is the capital. But then a battle at the Marne River, and it was the First Battle of the Marne. France stops Germany's advance, and the two kind of set in battle lines. But these battle lines that they form at the First Battle of the Marne actually end up becoming the battle lines for the next 4 years. And so early on in the war, you still see kind of traditional military tactics, kind of lining up in lines to fight. You have the idea of kind of charges and things like that. Very soon, though, that idea of warfare is going to change very, very quickly. So here you see German troops kind of advancing through fields in France. So after the Battle of the Marne, the Western Front is established. This Western Front is going to essentially be the battle line for the next 4 years of the First World War. It's going to start around the Marne. You can kind of see with Reims and Verdun, but what's going to happen is that both sides are going to try to outflank each other until pretty soon the line is going to start moving north all the way to the sea and all the way south to the border of neutral Switzerland. So pretty soon what you have is a 440-mile line that all these countries are going to fight over for 4 years. And the Western Front is going to be 440 miles long, and pretty soon it's going to all be covered by trenches. And the race to the sea kind of moved the line north as both sides try to kind of get around the other side. And this battle line is going to remain almost unchanged for the entire war. And very soon this war is going to kind of degenerate into a war of attrition, where the goal is no longer to get territory, but the goal is to kill as many of the opponents as possible to try to make them quit the war. But on the Eastern Front, Russia actually mobilized a lot faster than Germany thought. And so very quickly, after Germany invades France, Russia invades Germany. And so Germany very quickly is at a huge disadvantage, fighting a war on two separate fronts. But the Germans are actually very successful in the East, and they defeat the Russian invasion, and they counterattack very successfully, resulting in 2 million Russian casualties in 1915 alone. This big defeat of Russia by Germany is going to start to contribute to a lot of anti-war feeling in Russia, which is eventually going to culminate in the revolution and the overthrow of the Tsar. And so here are some pictures from the Eastern Front. Russian soldiers, German machine gun lines, and even kind of a little bit of dancing, where a German prisoner on the left is being taught how to dance by Russian troops. And so in the early years of this war, it's also important to remember that kind of there's not a lot of hatred between the two sides. It is a political conflict. And at the end of 1914, kind of once the trenches had been dug and the war had been underway, on Christmas of 1914, a truce was called between the two sides, and both of them came out of their trenches and they enjoyed a game of soccer, as well as some kind of fellowship, and they gave each other rations and things like that. And this, by one historian, was called the last twitch of the 19th century, kind of the last moment of the old idea of civilization that is going to be represented in this war. But very quickly, reality starts to set in on the Western Front. By 1915, the war is a stalemate. Nobody has an advantage. Nobody can really move one side or the other. And because of a lot of new weapons, the war very quickly gets out of control. And we have kind of unprecedented horrors of war, unprecedented casualties, and all sorts of things like that. We have heavy artillery, poison gas, machine guns, barbed wire, mines, grenades, airplanes, zeppelins, and tanks. And so this is really the first industrial war. It is really the first time that all this new technology is going to be used in a massive way. And the results are going to be quite horrifying to both the people fighting in it and to the rest of the world. Trench warfare kind of ushers in a new kind of warfare. You can see on this aerial map all of the things that look like they're spots, those are all artillery craters. And the lines are all dug trenches. You can see kind of they're dug on zigzag diagonals, and we'll talk about why later. And so, in order to kind of fight a trench warfare, one side, if they want to capture territory, has to go across no man's land, which is basically the bombed out, barbed wired, mined area between the two trenches that is covered by machine gun fire and covered by frontline troops. So we're going to learn more about trench warfare, but this is how it is looking. So here's some images. And conditions in the trenches were largely kind of horrific. Water would seep into the trench, rats, all sorts of other things, and you basically be living in these trenches every single day. And in this case, these trenches are going to last for about 4 years. You have things like trench foot and other diseases that basically can rot away your flesh if your feet are too damp, or any other diseases would travel very quickly through the trenches. Also, poison gas is going to be a part of this war. And in fact, chemical warfare is going to be so horrific that no sides are really going to want to use it in the Second World War. People were blinded and killed by the gas, and this ushers in a new era of war. Also, the idea of going over the top, of charging across no man's land, becomes a horrifying experience for a lot of these soldiers. Sometimes when people went over the top, very few came back. And the battle lines didn't really change very much. And most of kind of these charges ended in disaster and failure. Also, civilians were now targets in Zeppelin raids, where giant Zeppelins would drop bombs on civilian cities, became a part of this war, became a part of everyday life in this conflict. London saw some bombing by German forces during this time, as well as other major cities. Also, the idea of airplanes being involved in combat is going to be new during this time, and so that too is going to add another element to this war. And the most famous pilot of the war you may have heard of before. His name was Manfred von Richthofen, also known as the Red Baron, and he was the most successful flying ace during the war. And so from 1915 to 16, the war is going to continue as a stalemate. There's going to be an incredible loss of life, unprecedented, and it's going to shock a lot of people on all the sides. No real advantages are going to be gained in these years. The war at sea is going to be a stalemate between all the sides, and so because of this, a new strategy emerges. No longer is the goal territory. Now the goal is to force the enemy to surrender with high casualties, what is known as war of attrition. And two great examples of this are the Battle of Verdun and the Battle of the Somme. In the Battle of Verdun, the entire battle breaks down, and there's heavy casualties on both sides. For France, this battle is stuck in their memory forever. In the Battle of the Somme, on a single day, Great Britain lost more people than on any other day in Britain's history. So these battles are unprecedented, and it's going to usher in a new era in warfare. And this is also a total war. And so bombing raids and battlefields are going to incorporate kind of civilian populations. Also, the mobilization of the whole country for the war effort is going to be very serious. Enlistment in the armed services of both men and women fulfilling all sorts of roles is going to encompass a large percentage of population. The economies of these major countries are completely changed to focus solely on the war effort. And at home, rationing often left shortages at home to make sure there was enough supplies on the front for the war. So now let's talk about how the United States gets involved in this war. And the United States in the 19-teens is going to pursue the policy of isolationism. They declare neutrality, as we talked about. And the country is really split on if the U.S. is to come in, who they should support. German Americans and Irish Americans want the U.S. to either stay neutral or to join the Central Powers, to join with Germany. Irish Americans hate Great Britain, and so they want to see Great Britain lose this war. And Germans obviously wanted the United States to back their home country. But most American citizens are going to favor siding with Great Britain and France. And a large part of this is that the businesses and the banks had more invested in Great Britain and France than they did in Germany or Austria-Hungary. And so there's a lot of money for a lot of American citizens invested in an Allied victory. And so the country is kind of split, but the United States is going to lean towards backing Great Britain and France. But again, the war is in Europe. Why would the United States get involved? And the first reason the United States gets involved is because of something called unrestricted submarine warfare, where Germany used its large fleet of submarines to attack all ships sailing near Great Britain. The idea was if they could prevent supplies getting into Great Britain, then they could successfully get the edge over Great Britain in the war. But what this led to was the sinking of some American ships and the destruction of a lot of American property that was being traded with Great Britain. And so again, kind of submarine warfare going to change a lot of things. And a passenger ship known as the Lusitania was sunk by a German submarine with 128 Americans on board in the year 1915. What this does in the American public is that it galvanizes the American people kind of against Germany. It's going to turn public opinion against Germany, and they're going to see them as the bad guys. 128 Americans were killed in this attack, and so Americans are going to start to lean towards joining the Allies over the Central Powers. Then finally in January of 1917, an intercepted telegram is going to bring the United States into the war and is going to help lead the war to its conclusion. And the Zimmerman telegram was a telegram sent from Germany to Mexico, offering an alliance with Mexico if the United States entered World War I. But Mexico rejected the offer, fresh off of their revolution, not wanting to get involved in a world war and not wanting to get involved in a war with the United States. And the Zimmerman telegram may have just gone into history as something that we never would have figured out about, but Great Britain's spies intercept a telegram and they let the United States know. Because of the Zimmerman telegram, the United States believed that Germany was planning an invasion of the United States. And so they declare war on Germany in 1917. And so Woodrow Wilson, the president at the time, went before Congress to ask for a declaration of war, and Woodrow Wilson got his vote from Congress, and the United States was then involved in World War I, saying that the cause of the war was not the Zimmerman telegram or any sort of the European causes, but Woodrow Wilson said that the war would be to make the world safe for democracy. And so we'll talk more about Woodrow Wilson and the United States getting involved in the war when we return to class.